Thank you so much, Mary Jordan. I'm reading from the Pulitzer Prize-winning autobiography of my mother, Personal History by Katharine Graham, and I'd add two things to Mary's précis. One is, as this decision is being made whether or not to print the stories about the Pentagon Papers, our company is going public, selling stock to the public the same week. And the second is, once we went public, the author, Katharine Graham, was going to be the only woman CEO of a Fortune 1000 company, 999 guys and her. The previous 4 or 5 chapters of the book tell in enormous, excruciating detail how terrified she felt at what she thought was her lack of ability to do this job, and how fearful she was that she was going to mess the entire thing up. So I was pleased that we had found the papers and had them in hand, but I spent the day of June 17th in a rather routine way. I had planned a large party to be held that afternoon at my house for Harry Gladstein, a lovely man who was leaving the Post. He had come to the paper as circulation director, but was vice president and business manager at the time. The whole business staff of the Post had gathered for the party, including Fritz Beebe, the chairman and a lawyer, who had come to Washington for it, but had gone to Ben Bradley's house to check on things. As it turned out, a fierce legal battle was being waged. What Ben Bradley experienced as he rushed back and forth between the room where the reporters were working and the living room where the lawyers were conferring was that the lawyers were pushing hard not to publish, or at least to wait till there was a decision on the court injunction against the New York Times. Our situation was very different from that of the Times. The court order against them meant that if we were to publish, our action might be viewed as defying the law and contempt of that court. Even more difficult was the delicacy of our business position. We were going public that week. So while in one room at Ben's house, Chalmers Roberts was banging out the story for publication next day, Murray Marder, another reporter, was slowly reading through the material, and Don Oberdorfer was working on later installments. In another room, the lawyers, with Fritz and the editors, were locked in tough, intense arguments. The lawyers arguing against publication, and Fritz seemed to be siding with the lawyers. Bradley was beginning to feel squeezed between the lawyers and reporters lining up for publishing, and the lawyers who at one point suggested a compromise whereby the Post would not publish the papers on Friday, but would notify the US Attorney General of its intention to publish on Sunday. Howard Simons, deputy managing editor and later head of the Nieman Foundation, summoned the reporters to talk directly with the lawyers. Oberdorfer said the compromise was, quote, the shittiest idea I've ever heard. Roberts said the Post would be, quote, crawling on its belly to the Attorney General. He was due to retire in 2 weeks, and if the Post didn't publish, he would move up his retirement, make it a resignation, and publicly accuse the Post of cowardice. Murray Marder said if the Post doesn't publish, it'll be in much worse shape as an institution than if it does. Managing editor Gene Patterson stopped by Ben Bradley's house on his way to my party and then walked up the hill to my house. As I was receiving guests, he pulled me aside and gave me the first warning of what was to come, saying he believed the decision on whether to print was going to be checked with me, and that he, quote, knew I fully recognized that the soul of the newspaper was at stake. God, do you think it's coming to that? I asked. Yes, Gene said he did. It was a lovely June day, and the party for Harry spilled out of the house and onto the terrace and the lawn. I was making a toast to him and going full blast about how much he'd meant to the paper and to me personally when someone tugged at my sleeve and said with some urgency, "You're wanted on the phone." I protested that I had to finish the toast, but the response was, "They want you now," and then a typically Katharine Graham sentence. I finally got the idea that it was really important, wound up the toast quickly, and then took a call in the corner of the library. I was sitting on a small sofa near the open door, and Paul Ignatius, the top business executive at the paper, stood near me. Fritz Beebe, the chairman of the company, was on the other end of the line. He told me about the argument between the editors and the lawyers over whether to publish the next day, outlined the reasoning on both sides, and said, "I'm afraid you are going to have to decide." I asked Fritz for his own view. He was editorial-minded and decent, and I knew I could trust his response. I was astonished when he said, "I guess I wouldn't." I then asked for time to think it over, saying, "Can't we talk about this? Why do we have to make up our minds in such haste when the Times took 3 months to decide?" At this point, Ben and the editors got on various telephones at Ben's house. I asked them what the big rush was, suggesting we think about it for a day. "No," said Ben. "It was important to keep up the momentum of publication and not let a day intervene." He stressed by this time the grapevine knew we had the papers, and journalists inside and outside were watching us. I well remember the response of Phil Jalen, the editor of the editorial page, when I said that publishing could destroy the paper. Yes, he agreed, but there's more than one way to destroy a paper. At the same time, the editors were saying, "You've got to do it." Paul Ignatius stood by me, repeating each time more insistently, "Wait a day, wait a day." I was extremely torn by Fritz's saying he wouldn't publish. I knew him so well. We had never differed on any important issue. And after all, he was the lawyer, not I. But I also heard how he said it. He didn't hammer at me. He didn't stress the issues related to going public, and he didn't say the obvious thing that I would be risking the whole company on this decision. He simply said he guessed he wouldn't. I felt that despite his stated opinion, he had somehow left the door open for me to decide on a different course. Frightened and tense, I took a big gulp and said, "Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, let's go, let's publish." And I hung up.